pushing the Amazon to the brink of collapse, we are now hopeful that the new president is seriously going to reverse those policies and enhance and increase protection efforts, enforcement, and commitments.
I am thrilled today to welcome Atossa Soltani to Facing Future. Atossa is one of my great sheroes. She walks the talk. She lives part-time in Ecuador, working on the ground to help protect the Amazon. And Atossa currently is the Director of Global Strategy for the Sacred Headwaters. Atossa also is the founder and board president of Amazon Watch. And at the end of the program, she will tell you how Amazon Watch came about in a very magical and inspiring way. So Atossa, my first concern here is there hope for the Amazon now? Is there new hope for the Amazon?
Sheila, thank you for having me on the program. The answer to your question about hope is yes. In the last 3 months, we have watched as President Lula of Brazil, has taken office and brought with him a number of renowned environmental activists and indigenous leaders in high-level positions in the environment ministry, in a newly created indigenous peoples ministry, in various parts of the government, in order to basically put the Amazon protection of the Amazon rainforest in the center of his public policies. And this is giving us hope after the dark ages of the Bolsonaro administration, where we saw 30% increase in deforestation rates. We saw a massive invasion of indigenous lands. We saw forest fires that were set by farmers and ranchers. We just saw mass destruction of the Amazon the last 4 years. And so after this dark period of pushing the Amazon to the brink of collapse, we are now hopeful that the new president is seriously going to reverse those policies and enhance and increase protection efforts, enforcement, and commitments to get to zero deforestation as quickly as possible, while we'll still have a chance to stop the tipping point of no return in the Amazon.
What specifically is he doing especially with the extractive goings on there, loggers and miners? What's the plan?
We saw recently a military action to expel miners from the Yanomami territory. We're also seeing that he's come to meet with the Biden administration. He's traveled to Europe. He's calling for a summit, presidential summit, with the president of Colombia, Petro, who's the other hopeful champion of Amazon conservation. We will, hopefully we will see these presidents pulling together world leaders in August in Brazil for a very important, urgent summit, getting commitments from financial institutions, getting commitments from the wealthy countries in the global north, in order to make basically real the commitments to get to zero deforestation, to support land rights and demarcation. He's already said he's committed to the demarcation of indigenous lands, which hadn't happened, basically in 15 years. We haven't seen any demarcation of indigenous peoples' territories. So we're really excited about that. There's also hope because the European Union just passed a deforestation law in order to limit and curtail the entry of commodities that come from deforestation, like cattle, like gold, like leather, like timber, and beef, basically, for the European markets. Now these commodities will be required to prove that they don't come from deforestation, and that there needs to be certification as deforestation free, and there needs to be channels for citizens, for environmental organizations to sue in order to enforce, in order to push, for example, the governments of European countries will be required to investigate complaints, and we'll have a chance to basically blow the whistle on illegal commodities trade. So those are all reasons we are remaining hopeful that indigenous rights and conservation of the Amazon will be central to the agenda of at least two governments, and hopefully they can mobilize global will. Biden has already said he's committed to supporting the Amazon. Norway, which had cut off funding to the Amazon Fund, has resumed its commitment. So I think there is a real chance that we can mobilize global action in time. Of course, there are countries like Peru where we're still seeing attack and chaos among the legislative and executive branch, political turmoil, but also this moment where economic interests related to logging and mining industry are trying to basically roll back environmental protection. So there's a big battle going on there. In Ecuador, we're seeing commitments in words, but no action to basically curtail the expansion of oil drilling. There's a big problem in the Ecuadorian Amazon is oil and mining, where basically we're seeing some of the most biodiverse rainforests on the planet threatened by oil, new drilling and mining. And of course, in Brazil, we've seen massive expansion of cattle ranching to the point where Brazil now supplies something like 20% of the world's beef exports, including to the United States, where it's marketed as, free range beef. I think we need to be very careful about those kinds of labels, and we generally need to reduce our consumption of rainforest products like gold, like timber, and specifically beef and soy, which is basically, these are huge commodities. And looking, for example, even at the oil exports, majority of oil exports from the Ecuadorian Amazon, from places like the Yasuni National Park, end up in California in the Western United States, where 1 in 6 tanks of gas that we pump in our cars come from the rainforest. So, the sooner we can transition to fossil fuel free transportation, and also to cut subsidies to fossil fuels, to push for policies, even in California, to end imports of oil from the Amazon, the better. And ultimately, who's also responsible for this destruction are banks, financial institutions like BlackRock, and many banks that are engaged in financing oil and mining activities and also deforestation activities. We're calling on financial institutions to also adopt the deforestation-free investment portfolios to make sure there's no new oil drilling, no mining, no cattle ranching, and that banks stop financing what I call the dismemberment of the planet's life support systems.
Thank you for sharing that. You've already covered my major question about what can we do. You'll see behind here in Amazon crude ribbon, which I actually got at one of your events, Artists for Amazonia. But could you also say just a few words about some of the representation of the indigenous people in the President Lula's government and in Congress, some of whom I know that you know? That's a big shift too.
Exactly. There are, one of my closest indigenous leaders that I've closely worked with is Sonia Guajajara. She was the president of the Association of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, the foremost indigenous organization in Brazil, working to defend indigenous rights in the Amazon, but all throughout Brazil. And she was elected to the House of Deputies, which is, like the Congress in Brazil. But she's basically been appointed as the Minister of Indigenous Peoples, which is a new post. It's a new ministry that Lula administration created. And she will be basically overseeing the implementation of Brazil's obligation under international and domestic laws to recognize indigenous people's rights, land rights, and collective rights. And so I'm very excited
Wow.
about that. That is a significant, achievement. And she still has a seat in Congress, so she's appointing her replacement there. There's also another member of Congress, the first ever Indigenous member of Congress, which is Joania Waipishana. She is also a lawyer, Indigenous lawyer, who I've known since the 90s. She's now in charge of FUNAI, which is the Indigenous Peoples Foundation of the Brazilian government. And so, yeah, and we also have another member of Indigenous organizations in Congress. We have, a number of seats, at least 3 Indigenous people seats and 2 ministry posts, along with Marina Silva, who's not Indigenous, but she came from the rubber tappers. She was Chico Mendes's cohort, and she's now the Minister of Environment again. She was under the first Lula administration as well, and she helped consecrate the protection of over 50 million acres. And Marina Silva was Chico Mendes's cohort. She is, from the rubber tapper communities. The rubber tappers were forest defenders. And during her first term with Lula administration, she was responsible for reducing deforestation rates by 70%. And she also helped consecrate the protection, creating protected areas and reserves over 50 million acres of rainforest. And so we're really excited to see how she, what she does in this term. She's very much committed to maintaining the ecological integrity of the Amazon, enforcing laws, and getting back to zero deforestation. So it's an exciting time, and hopefully the international community will help fund Brazil's new aspirations for the Amazon, because the Amazon is a vital organ and a key part of the life support system for the entire planet.
Yes, you were saying about one point about the hydrologic cycle, which, people know about the lungs for the most part, but you have another organ to tell us about from Mother Earth that is related to the Amazon.
That's Indigenous peoples for as long as I can remember would say the Amazon is the heart of the world. But then we have been hearing how the Amazon is the lungs of the earth, and of course it's true in the way the Amazon absorbs CO2, and the rainforest absorbs CO2 and breathe out oxygen. And just like our own lungs, the reverse of our own lungs. But it's also being demonstrated through science and Earth system science that the Amazon is also a heart of the hydrological climatic system of the biosphere. And it's amazing. You can actually see on satellite imagery how the Amazon rainforest acts like a low pressure zone that pulls in the moisture vapor from the atmosphere, from over the Atlantic, from the Atlantic coming in into Brazil. And then the trees are this basically, they nucleate the clouds, allowing them to drop their rain, the water, retained in the clouds. The trees then evapotranspire. They sweat out through, when they do photosynthesis, their pores open up, literally rises through the tree's trunk and into the leaves, and out from the leaves and into the sky. And on average, every tree evapotranspires roughly 1,000 liters of water vapor per day.
Wow.
Per tree. And that evapotranspiration generates basically geysers that emanate from the forest into the sky. And then, of course, those rain clouds get nucleated again and drop the rain. And so this circulation system of constantly creating clouds, the trees creating clouds, expelling the heat in the surface up, in the higher reaches of the atmosphere, so that it's, radiates out into space and cools the forest, is a significant role that the forest cools the planet. And also the rain basically gets cycled 6 or 7 times until it hits the Andes. And then it forms these atmospheric rivers that bring rain deeper and deeper and deeper into the southern continent, South America, all the way to the southern cone, where the rain from the Amazon is responsible for something like 95% of all the rain in, for example, Rio, Sao Paulo, and those places. And then it also comes north when some of that rain, some of those atmospheric rivers bring moisture and rain to Mexico, to the Central America, to California, where there have been some modeling that shows that moisture content over the Sierra Nevada are in part determined by rainfall patterns in the Amazon, that if we lost the Amazon, we would see a collapse of the hydrological system in California and the Sierra Nevada, for example. So the earth is truly, and as you watch a time lapse of cloud cover over the Amazon, what you see is the moisture coming into the forest, this pumping action, and then the spreading of the atmospheric rivers north and south to the rest of the world. And so you truly see how the Amazon is the heart of the hydrological and also regulating the climate of the continent, but also being critical to regulating global climate. So yeah, and the key to this action, to this biotic pump, this plant-based, air conditioning system and rain machine for the planet are the trees. As I said, the trees do the evapotranspiration, do the lifting. And what we know is that if we lose something like between 20 and 25% of the forest cover is key. The forest cover is key to this action of cycling of the rain. Once we lose somewhere between 20 and 25% of the tree cover of a forest, what we end up with is a diminishing amount of water that's being cycled through the forest. And that starts a feedback loop where over time, the forest starts to die back. The forest no longer has sufficient rain in order to be a rainforest and starts to die back and become a savanna. Now, that happening at the level of the Amazon basin, which is 9 countries and an area the size of the continental United States, would be disastrous for the global climate. A dieback of something like 50 to 70% of the Amazon is what would be in store if we basically tip and undermine the hydrological cycle. We would see that happen. That might take 50 to 100 years for that dieback to happen. But the point of no return, the point at which that process begins, is happening now. We have already degraded and deforested about 26% of the Amazon basin. We are past the tipping point of the 25% threshold. What we need to do to ensure the ecological integrity of the Amazon is we need to get to zero deforestation by 2025, and we actually need to mount a massive reforestation effort to reforest something like to get down to 80% forest cover. So we need to reforest 6% of the Amazon while protecting every tree, every acre that remains. So that is the task before us. That is why there's a campaign calling for commitment to protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025. And the work I'm doing in the sacred headwaters is this work to basically protect the headwaters of the Amazon. It's the largest indigenous-led conservation initiative in the most biodiverse region of the Amazon basin, where 30 indigenous nations have made a commitment to get to basically protect the rest of the standing forest and to help transition the economic system to a regenerative, what we call standing forest bioeconomy, a regenerative economy that aligns the flourishing of forest, the protection of forest with economic prosperity. And we know it's possible. Not only is it possible, it's what we must do in order to protect the Amazon. And the Headwaters Initiative is, people can learn about it at headwaters.org. It's a model for the rest of the Amazon and rest of the world. It's a work that we're doing to say indigenous territories are the best conserved parts of the Amazon. We should support the well-being of the people who live there so they can continue to protect their forest. And we should use their traditional knowledge to apply that knowledge and their reverence and love for the forest and their connection to nature to basically transition the economy from a growth-based extractive economy to a regenerative economy that's focused on restoration, regeneration, and conservation. So that's the work we're doing. And I'm really happy to invite everyone to get behind that work and sign the declaration, donate, get involved. The Amazon is vital organs of the biosphere. And, we are all cells in the body of a living earth.
One last thing, and that is you were going to very briefly tell us, because I think this story is inspiring for lots of people who want to be more proactive. But how did Amazon Watch start? I mean, there it was in a flash, and now I don't know how many people are there in the organization, but it has blossomed and you all are doing such amazing work.
Yes, at the time I was at the Rainforest Action Network, but I had actually decided to work focusing solely on the Amazon and leave the Rainforest Action Network for a much more on the ground sort of work. And I wasn't sure how to get going or how to start it, but one day I was faced with a moment where the president of Brazil was getting an award in Stanford, and he was speaking about the humanities, but yet his policies were rolling back land rights for indigenous peoples and opening up the Amazon to commodities exports. And I felt like it was needed to be exposed. So I had a bullhorn and I got up on a little plant ledge and confronted him with my bullhorn as he was walking out of the auditorium, after his speech. And he was, had been basically surrounded by about 30 or 40 journalists that had come from Brazil, and there was journalists in the Bay Area covering this moment. And as he was walking away from the auditorium into his limousine, I confronted him, and he basically took him a second to stop to listen to me, long enough for the media to get the shot of us face to face with a bullhorn. He then left in his limousine and left me there with the media asking, what was this about? And at the time, all I had was a Time magazine article talking about Brazil's vision for the Amazon, which was going to be disastrous and a global catastrophe. And so I handed out that article. And when the journalist asked me my name and who I worked for, I realized I didn't have any agency, but I just made it up. I just said, I'm Atossa Soltani, I'm with Amazon Watch, and I made it up on the spot. And the next day was all over the media, and I was like, oh, I guess I have to do this now. And so I began a process of building Amazon Watch, which is now celebrating its 26th anniversary and has over 30 staff people in the field and in its headquarters, and has been distributing millions of dollars to indigenous battles in the Amazon, and has been having a great track record of holding companies accountable and protecting and stewarding forests for future generations and making the Amazon issue a global priority. So I'm very proud of
I
us.
love that story. It's like passion. It starts the fire in the belly, and it went on from there.
That's right.
So one last thing was, I think there was a video that you said you might be able to share that we could put at the end of the program.
Yeah, it's called Amazonia 2041, A Vision from the Future. Is basically a 9-minute video where we talk about what could be possible if we implemented this plan for the sacred headwaters.
Oh,
Here,
right. Is
put
that
it
the
in the-
animated one? Animated one?
Yeah, that's the animated
Oh,
one.
that's amazing. Okay. Gosh, I'm just so grateful. Thank you for your work. And I know you're also live part-time in Ecuador, so you are on the ground with these various struggles and battles. So so grateful, Atossa, for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. I'm grateful for you as well. Thank you so much.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Let me paint you a picture of an inspiring future for our world. It's a future that began right here in the headwaters region of the great Amazon River between Ecuador and Peru. The year is 2041. The age of extraction has finally given way to the age of buen vivir, and a beautiful bioeconomy is thriving around the globe. I'm here looking back at how we protected this rainforest and in doing so, transform the world. To reach this future, we had to start by facing our past. Thousands of years ago, my Amazonian ancestors already knew that the earth is alive, and that this forest is its beating heart, something only recently discovered by science. And because they saw the world as alive, and themselves as an integral part of her, they lived by an ethical code of harmonious coexistence and reciprocity with nature, known as Buen Vivir. But then the conquest happened, and the wisdom of Buen Vivir was all but lost. The world I was born into had been shaped by Spanish invaders who cast aside the principled aspirations of Buen Vivir and promised progress through plunder. For centuries, the many disparate indigenous nations of the Amazon and their living forests were pillaged and destroyed in the name of progress, development, and profit. We were reduced to fighting over artificial borders brought by colonization and the newborn republics. People were taught to see our nation's wealth only in what could be extracted from the ground. First gold, and later minerals, timber, and black gold. But in the year 2019, the same year millions of acres of rainforest were burned down, the UN-sponsored Science Panel for the Amazon issued a severe warning that the Amazon was reaching a tipping point that would trigger a massive dieback on the entire forest, with catastrophic impacts for the future of humanity. It was finally accepted as scientific fact that the Amazon forest acts as the beating heart of the earth, circulating rain around the planet and regulating its temperature. The scientists were starting to understand what we've been saying all along. They joined us in acknowledging that at least 80% of this rainforest must be left standing to prevent the collapse of the entire planet's circulatory system. Though the forest was burning, the spirit of our people burned brighter. Once divided, the people of the region now united to issue the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Declaration. Put forth by the largest alliance of indigenous Amazonian nations ever assembled, their vision was ambitious and inspiring. To have these highly biodiverse headwaters of the Amazon River Basin recognized as permanently protected bioregion, a territory demarcated not by current political borders, but by its natural and cultural boundaries. The declaration called for a ban on industrial-scale resource extraction and instead mapped pathways for a just transition to a new regenerative bioeconomy. The formation of the initiative was an unprecedented step towards indigenous rights and stewardship. But it was just the beginning of a long journey. Before we could catch our breath from the fires of 2019, COVID erupted, killing millions around the globe. The pandemic helped expose inequity and fragility of the current economic system. People everywhere were fed up and ready for something different, but exactly what that was still not clear. And like heeding a call, 2021 brought global shifts in the right direction. The US rejoined the rest of the world in the Paris Climate Agreement, and even China committed to zero carbon emissions by 2060. Then, the Sacred Headwaters Alliance unveiled its bioregional plan, which laid out in detail the solution pathways that would protect the region and transform its economy to prioritize the well-being of ecosystems and communities. From local food sovereignty to green transportation and renewable energy, the plan inspired people from all sectors to innovate a new type of progress, guided by the ancient Buen Vivir philosophy. There was much to do. First, we identified that the GDP is a flawed measure of progress that incentivizes destruction. So in 2022, inspired by Bhutan and New Zealand's Happiness Index, we created an alternative metric, the Buen Vivir Index, BVI, a new set of ecological and social indicators to measure the true wealth and health of nations. Soon after, a significant number of governments, including Peru and Ecuador, signed the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty to phase out the production of fossil fuels by 2030. Ecuador and Peru agreed to permanently leave untapped fossil fuel reserves in the ground. In exchange, China and the IMF negotiated the largest ever debt forgiveness package. Oil revenues were no longer needed to pay interest on national debt. Established to support the bioregional plan, the Sacred Headwaters Fund received over $1 billion in funding from around the world in its first 3 years. Standing forest work programs aimed at halting deforestation were launched, including enforcement and restoration initiatives transitioning thousands of oil workers to new bioeconomy jobs with equal pay. The newly formed Indigenous Youth Corps flexed their tech sovereignty by deploying new apps for monitoring the territory and cataloging its biodiversity, the highest levels registered anywhere on Earth. By 2024, ecological restoration made up the largest number of new jobs. That same year, the Peruvian government finally recognized indigenous peoples' ancestral land claims to the Sacred Headwaters region, guaranteeing protection of more than 22 million acres. Led by Peruvian youth in 2025, social movements voted for Buen Vivir candidates, and the constitutional amendment that recognizes the rights of nature was passed. The Buen Vivir movement was transforming worldviews, priorities, and policies. That's how, in 2026, Ecuador and Peru officially agreed to establish the protected Sacred Headwaters Bioregional Sanctuary, governed by a plurinational council that included the 30 indigenous nations from the region. A shift in culture was palpable as the Heart of the World Pride movement spread from the Andes to Brazil. The Forest Wisdom University opened in 2027 with just 10 faculty and 38 students. By 2028, BVI was adopted as a key policy by the progressive political parties in Ecuador and Peru. The Green Frontiers program invested in municipal and provincial governments of small Amazon frontier towns to implement eco-urban redesign plans, all done by planners who graduated from the New School of Applied Bioprinciples at the Forest Wisdom University. Ecuador and Peru finally reached their goal of 100% renewable energy in 2031. That was the first year no fossil fuels were extracted or imported to run the country. With a rising BVI, there was little argument for returning to the extractive economy of the past. The bioregional movement continued to sweep through the continent, and by the end of the 2030s had begun to transform the rest of the globe. Today, governance, local decision-making, and economic activity everywhere is being reorganized around the goal of maintaining the health and integrity of ecosystems, communities, and families. Inspired by what started here, the world has come to study with elders and their young apprentices at the Forest Wisdom University. Over 150,000 students are enrolled, studying everything from bioregional planning and regenerative economics to ethnophilosophy, integrative medicine, and agroforestry. Looking back from 2041, I am so grateful for the brave souls who had the courage to look into their turbulent past so they could create a harmonious future.